Hey there, I am just doing a quick video on the capitalism critique and how it has historically been done in, uh, from my experience with high school debaters. Also, this should give you a pretty good idea of how to answer it and some of the authors that you might want to consider looking at. All right, so from the top, the basic idea behind the capitalism critique is that basically everything that has ever happened that's been negative, environmental destruction, war, dehumanization, any of those things, are basically because of people's desire to get ahead, people's desire to push others down to get ahead for themselves. And so, if we can see things as capital or as a method of production for that reason, then that's part of the dynamic. So, what they would say is that the link is typically one of a couple of things. Either they will say that the plan itself, using education, using studying about computers, or doing any of those things, is rooted in a capitalist system. So if you think about it with schools, they might say the reason that people ultimately go to schools isn't because they want to learn, but because a long time ago people decided that if children went to school, then their parents could go to work more. And when their parents can go to work more things can be produced faster, which means that more money can be made. And so, really, the only reason that schools exist is because of capitalism. So, they would say that when you, as the affirmative, use a school, that you just do something that is part of capitalism, you engage in the capitalist system. Now, what they would say the problem with that is that capitalism is atrocious. They would say that like capitalism destroys the environment because every time we try to produce more and more things, we just look for like the lowest cost that we can do the fastest, most efficient. And the problem with that would be things like we strip out all the crops, or that we don't worry about things that pollute a lot because it's cheaper to do it the other way. And so, or they might say that it causes war because if we realize that another country has items that are cheaper that we could just steal from them, then we should just invade them, take them, and then use those items to produce more goods and services, which is kind of the root of capitalism. Then they would say that the alternative or the way to break free of that is a variety of things. They might just say no to capitalism. So like say no to the affirmative plan and vote negative to just say no to capitalism. And sometimes you'll see evidence there from like Zizek or Daley that just say no. One of the other arguments that I've seen a lot lately has been about what they call historical materialism, which just says that part of understanding capitalism is tracing back what was actually first. And whenever we don't do that, whenever we just jump into the problem right now, that we continue to have problems. Now, the reason that the capitalism critique makes a lot of sense for a lot of teams is that it probably links to just about everything. And so, just about every case on every topic forever has a capitalist underpinning. So, regardless of whether you're promoting STEM in a school, whether you are trying to teach people a foreign language, whether you are trying to do research on the internet, really the reason that all of those things probably exist, or at least there's evidence that says that it exists, is because of capitalism. Because we want to produce more goods and more services at a more efficient rate so that more people can have more stuff. And ultimately, those pieces of evidence are really good generally. The other thing that's generally really good about the capitalism debate is that even if you had a team who was doing something like saying you should vote for us for a reason other than the topic, like you should vote for us as a survival strategy because African Americans are underrepresented in policy debate, or because there aren't enough women in policy debate, or because there aren't enough whatever in policy debate. They would say that a lot of times the reason that those arguments are advanced is because of capitalism, is that ultimately those things get co-opted. That people will say initially, and they'll look at examples like music in the South in the U.S., where they were playing the blues as a way to tell their narratives, but then those stories became such that record companies would go in and say, can you just kind of change it a little bit, because then we can sell more records and we can pull you out of poverty. The reason that that's bad is because it continues this capitalist cycle where the real stories don't get told, environments get harmed, the economy becomes the driving factor in everything, and we end up having a problem. And so there's a couple of ways that you can address this. A lot of the things are going to be similar to the ways that you address any critique. First of all, of course, you can make arguments about solvency deficits, how capitalism is inevitable. These cards are pretty okay, talking about there's nothing that we can do about capitalism, that it's going to continue happening, and that whether the affirmative is there or not, or the alternative is there or not, that capitalism will exist. You can also make the argument that says that just singular rejections of capitalism don't do anything. There's some pretty good evidence that talks about, hey, like, look, we've been trying to reject capitalism in different parts, whether it's as a country or as an individual, for at least a couple hundred years, and nothing's really developed with that. We haven't gotten to the next stage, which means that just rejecting it from a perspective of this particular debate round isn't enough. Those are some solvency arguments. As far as permutations go, one of the arguments that you can say is do both. You can use things like the affirmative plan as a step against capitalism, and a lot of times the affirmatives that we're looking at, we would say something like, look, like, education is good because education is good. And like, we don't make a claim in the 1AC about the economy or trying to make things better for the economy, or we do try to make a claim about the environment. And so using the affirmative plan as a step towards solving capitalism is good. You can also read offensive arguments, either saying that capitalism is actually good, and there are some reasons for that. You can say things like capitalism was what allowed people to get to the moon, or to do space travel, which is really critical. You can say that capitalism actually promotes the environment. You can say that rejecting capitalism throws the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, that it takes care of capitalism, but it also takes care of the sometimes good things that capitalism provides, like some of the ways that money gets redistributed for people in poverty because of generosity, because people have more, or food survival, that kind of thing. So I mean, you've got some arguments that you can make there. Also, like, theoretically, most teams are going to read arguments along with a capitalism critique that probably contradict capitalism, or the critique. So, like, for example, the fact that in the debate round, ultimately they're going after a ballot in order to use that as a form of capital, and they don't really care who they step on, how they get there. So you can make some arguments and look at some dynamics, how those things play out as well. So as far as specific information, I think that if you look up Slavoj Žižek, the last name is Zizek, you'll get some pretty good information about how that plays out. One of the other authors that obviously has been foundational to this is Karl Marx, and that's why Marxism is also kind of a part of this conversation. Marx thought says that the problem is that the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer, and that everything is really a class struggle between the rich and the poor. It's not really between men and women, or between races, or even between nationalities. It's really a conflict between the rich and the poor. And the only way to stop that is to actually just abandon it and to move away from that position. So hopefully that helps with kind of a basic breakdown. Neoliberalism is another critique that is similar in a lot of ways. You're still going to be talking about capitalism. And so honestly, while they're not exactly the same, for the most part, the answers that you're going to be making against them are going to be pretty close. So if you have any other questions, feel free to let me know, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.